Hello everyone, it's Joe here from Snake Draft FPL and we are back properly this time. Let's get stuck into the pre-season, and where else would we start than draft rankings. So today I am bringing you my top 10 draft picks for the brand new season of Draft FPL. Let's just get stuck straight into it. This is based on standard FPL scoring, of course. I've just rolled out my first bit of Patreon content. That is my early season full defender rankings, which I've tweaked a little bit how I have created them this year. So if you're interested in the Patreon, now is the perfect time to sign up. There's a link down below in the description. I am also going to be using Fantasy Football Hub's stats and graphics this year as well, and there is a link down below in the description to them as well if you want to check that out. They do some really useful stuff, as you'll see coming up in the video. So let's just go straight into the number one pick. You can see him there already. Who else would it be other than the man himself, Erling Haaland? So on each of these you can see I've got the heat map on the right hand side, and I've also got the data radar, and this shows some of the most important stats for fantasy football. We've got on the right hand side goal threat, on the left hand side assist threat, and the top middle is expected fantasy points, which is kind of a blend of everything, and that is something you really want to pay attention to. And you can see from Haaland here, massive goal threat, nothing to be surprised about there. I think he's undoubtedly the number one pick this season. As I said in the preview, you can get all this data on Fantasy Football Hub, and there is a link down below in the description if you want to sign up to that. But I don't think anyone's going to be surprised that Haaland's number one. I'd like to know how often he isn't picked at first pick this season in drafts. I think it's going to be very unlikely. I guess there will be some people that think maybe he might pick up an injury or two this year and therefore don't go for him, but I think it's a massive risk and it's just not even one I'd consider taking. Moving on to number two then, and I think this one is pretty obvious as well. Forwards are so hard to come by in fantasy. If you can get an absolute premium in draft FPL, then it makes it a lot easier. The rest of your draft is so much smoother. So Harry Kane comes in at number two. Another fantastic season for him last year, so consistent. And I know he may have agreed terms with Bayern or whatever, but I don't think there's any way he goes anywhere. He's hungry for that goals record. We know that he's kind of a selfish player, and I think he's going to desperately want to top that all-time Premier League goal record. His heat map is interesting in that it's completely different to Haaland's. He gets about the pitch so much more, but I do think with Maddison coming to Spurs, he is going to be doing a little bit less of that creative work and getting on the end of just as many chances. So you can see from his stat distribution, a lot of goal threat. He's got a decent amount of through balls, chances created as well. He does obviously have that creative potential, and I think he's a clear candidate for number two pick this season. Moving on to number three, and who else would it be other than the king of FPL, Mo Salah. Really underperformed last season, and yet he still covered 230 odd points, which will easily get you right up there by the end of the season. I've seen people on Twitter saying they regret drafting him last year. Well, I think that's mad. I would be picking him happily at number three pick this season. I know Liverpool didn't have the best year last year, but I expect them to do better this year, and I just think he is the man in that team. I know that he's getting a little bit older now, but I still think he's going to be absolutely nailed on, play the vast majority of minutes, and I like the way they're kind of looking this pre-season, to be honest. I think the players they've brought in suit them. I think Szoboszlai, I got that first time, Szoboszlai is going to add a new dynamic to their midfield, which they've desperately needed, and I think all things point towards Salah. The only slight worry is that McAllister potentially takes penalties off him, because I think most people will agree McAllister is a better penalty taker, but that doesn't necessarily mean he'll take them. Salah doesn't have the best record you've ever seen, but he's so goal hungry that I don't really think he is going to be taken away from the penalty duties. If he does, it does harm his potential quite a bit. Although I think he only scored 1 penalty last year off the top of my head, so not too bad really, even without them. Now it gets tough. Now it does get tough. The next 3 picks I think are really close together. Number 4, 5 and 6. I would not argue with you if you had them any way around, but I do think these 3 are the next best 3. And some people will definitely disagree with my number 4 pick, but you know, from my point of view, you cannot beat the consistency of Bruno Fernandes. Again, didn't have the highest scoring points tally last year, but there's something really underrated in draft about someone that shows up every single week. He does not miss games. He's got penalties. He's a creative player. And I know a lot of people are thinking with Mount coming in, he might be playing deeper, but I actually think Mount coming in might help him play a little bit further forward, because United had a bit of a problem last year where in a lot of games Fernandes was dropping quite deep alongside Casemiro to help build up play. They didn't really have anyone else that can do that job, and that's why Fernandes was dropping so deep. But I actually think, you know, Mount's ball retention is better than Bruno's for sure. I mean, Bruno Fernandes is a fantastic passer of the ball, but he doesn't have the best pass completion because he does go for those risky passes, whereas Mount's ball retention is really good. So I actually think Mount might play just a touch deeper than Bruno, which could then help Bruno Fernandes get back to his high scoring ways. I think, you know, there was a lot of a cloud over him last year because with Ronaldo in the side, he really didn't contribute the same way, but I'm not worried about that anymore. Ronaldo's gone. I think Bruno's back to being the main man. Like I said, on penalties, that is a massive thing when you're as consistent as he is and with the amount of penalties United get. So yeah, he's slightly ahead of my number 5 and number 6 picks, but it is close, and I do understand if you would have it another way around. On to number 5 then, and I actually swapped these over whilst I was making the graphics for the video, number 5 and number 6. I initially had number 6 ahead, but actually after looking at the stats on Fantasy Football Hub, I just couldn't really sit here and justify it in the video. So number 5 is Marcus Rashford. A lot of people will have Rashford ahead of Bruno in that United team because he is the one with the goal threat, and I understand that, and if he had penalties I'd absolutely put him ahead of Bruno, but he doesn't. You can see from his heat map, really high up on the left hand side. I actually prefer him playing off the left, and I think if United struggle to sign a striker and he's playing through the middle, I think it could hurt him slightly. I think he's more potent from a fantasy point of view, cutting in from the left hand side and getting in behind defences rather than playing with his back to goal. And you can look at that stat radar. I mean, it's all goal threat. He creates barely any chances, but he does get in behind defences and get those big chances, which is absolute fantasy gold dust. I think Rashford is a really, really strong pick this year. And then on to number 6, and it hurts me not to have him ahead of Rashford. As I said, I did have him ahead before I made the graphics for the video, but I just couldn't justify it. Bukayo Saka comes in at number 6 for me. I think he's a clear first round pick. You know, he does have penalties which Rashford doesn't, which is a big bonus, especially a team like Arsenal that absolutely live in the opponent's box. The thing that Saka has that Rashford doesn't have is the assist potential. He does create a lot of chances. He takes some corners. You can see from his crossing stat on the radar, that is a lot higher than what Rashford's is. He also has this really good knack of dribbling in kind of the corner of the 18-yard box, getting to the byline and pulling one back for an easy tap-in for a teammate, which we've seen him do a lot of times. So he does have that assist potential. He's great on bonus. He's an excellent finisher. I mean, he doesn't have the same level of big chances as Rashford does. You can see that on the radar. It's not even close to the level of big chances that Rashford gets. But Saka, I think, is probably a better goal scorer from the edge of the box than Rashford is. Saka really does have a knack of putting them in the bottom corner from that sort of just inside the box range. I do think Saka's on for an absolutely fantastic year. I think we kind of forget how young he is, to be honest, and he's only going to get better, and I think that's the same with this entire Arsenal team, to be honest. So I think Saka is more than justified to be in the top 6, first round pick. Some people might feel like it's a bit underwhelming picking him in the first round, but I definitely think he has earned that status as a big hitter. On to number 7 then, and it's someone that people might have expected a little bit earlier in previous years. He's been a top 3 pick. Kevin De Bruyne. His per 90 stats are off the charts as always. You can see from his heat map he lives on the edge of the box. He's a fantastic scorer of great goals from that area, and he creates a ton of chances for Haaland. But he does have this injury at the start of the season, and I'm always wary of players that aren't going to get a proper pre-season. It's so important for building up that base of fitness to get that pre-season in, especially with someone like De Bruyne, who has suffered from big injuries in the past. I am kind of hoping someone else takes him in pretty much all my leagues, because I know I won't be able to resist him at number 7 if it comes around to me, but I have a feeling this might be one of those years with him where he really does struggle for minutes. We've seen him rotated a lot over the last couple of seasons under Pep. You know, Pep does that anyway, but I think De Bruyne especially, he is getting a little bit older now, and I think Pep is going to be trying to save him for the most important matches, which means he will miss out on a lot of games. But I still think when he does play, absolutely wonderful option. But make sure you've got a deep squad if you pick him, because he is definitely going to miss games this year. On to number 8, and this player is probably the one that's fallen the most from last year's top 10. You may remember that I had him at number 2 or number 3 last year, and he absolutely disappointed. I picked him in one of my drafts, and he really let me down last year. But I do think there is definitely a chance that there's a resurgence for Son. You can see from his radar kind of everything is shrunken in a little bit. He really did not get going last season, but I think, as I said, I actually think Postecoglou is reasonably good signing as a manager for Spurs, and I think with the arrival of Maddison, that is going to really help that sort of Son and Kane link up, where they can just focus on getting on the end of chances a little bit more. You can see from Son's heat map, he was dropping deep so often, trying to pick up the ball and trying to get things happening, because Spurs as a unit were a total mess last season. You can't imagine it's going to be that bad again this year, although you never really know, but I do trust him to get a decent amount of points, enough that I think he's still definitely worthy a spot in the top 10. Next up then, number 9. I think this player is by far the furthest ahead of the next best player in their position, hence why he is in this top 10, and that is Trent Alexander-Arnold. He finished last season on absolute fire. He's playing in this inverted fullback role where he's stepping into midfield on the ball and absolutely murdering teams with his through balls, crosses and chance creation. You can see his radar there looks better than, it's like De Bruyne's but better, which is not something I say very often. He doesn't have the goal threat, but we all know that he actually does because of his proficiency with free kicks and long shots. You know, anytime he steps over the ball around the box, you think he's got a good chance of getting a goal. And I just think he is so good in that position. I would even have him probably top 20, even if he was listed as a midfielder. But because he is a defender, he's going to get an extra, 12 to 15 returns this season in the form of clean sheets. And I think he's unbelievable on bonus. He only needs 1 return, and he's likely in the bonus points. I would be astounded if he doesn't hit 200 points this season if he carries on in that same role he finished last season, which I think he will, because it seems to bring the best out of the team as a whole. Liverpool had a bad season, but they did have kind of an underrated run towards the end of the season where they went something like 10 games unbeaten. They won a load of games on the spin, and Trent really did pick up the points. I think he's absolutely brilliant first round pick. On to number 10 then, and it's my second Arsenal asset. I think he's probably the next best forward, although there are a few options that are quite close together. That is Gabriel Jesus. If you look at the stats on that radar, you'd think, oh my god, he is going to score 30 plus goals this season, but we know how he can be quite profligate in front of goal. Jesus has been known to rack up chances and not really take advantage of it, and that is kind of the story of last season, but he still had a pretty respectful season despite missing a chunk of it through injury. But I think if you're in this sort of end of the draft, it's quite nice to pick up a forward that you can rely on to start games, and that is Gabriel Jesus. He is going to be frustrating to own because he will have so many chances, but it does make it exciting to watch, and he will definitely come in with some hauls this season. You can see from his heat map, he does way more than just stay in the middle of the box, and that is quite frustrating sometimes when you see Saka slip a through ball and you think it's got to be Jesus on the end of it. The camera pans to it and it's Martinelli or Odegaard or Trossard, and you think, where is Jesus? And he stood on the left wing. That does happen, but it really does help the team attack, so I understand why they do it. But it is quite frustrating. I do, however, think he has the potential to have a really big season this year, and I still think he is easily a top 10 draft pick. Okay then everyone, they are my top 10 picks. The full rankings are going to be out for Patreon members sometime this week, but don't worry, I will be releasing them to everyone, but it won't be for a couple of weeks yet while I tinker with them. I'm going to be drip feeding Patreon content out through the next month or so, and it's going to be absolute key information for your draft. As I said at the start of the video, all the information here is via Fantasy Football Hub. If you would use the link in the description to have a look on there, that would help me out. If you enjoyed the video, please do hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. You do not want to miss any of my preseason content coming out in the next few weeks. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.